Forgetting is the mechanism that keeps your false identity alive. If you fully remembered who you were before being born, the character you call me would not survive. There exists within you a memory that does not belong to time. It is not emotional recollection or psychological construction. It is an inner gnosis that precedes flesh and passes through birth. Hermeticism teaches with rigor that this is not fantasy. It is direct knowledge of what is eternal in being. When consciousness falls into the body, the soul is not lost. It is veiled. What you call identity today is a functional ego, a false identity shaped by the matrix of the sensible world. In the Corpus Hermeticum, the teaching is clear in separating the mortal human from the nous, the divine intelligence that knows itself. To forget this is to enter spiritual blindness. The veil of illusion, also called the veil of Maya, does not destroy your essence. It merely renders it invisible to the conditioned mind. Awakening is not acquiring something new, it is removing the hypnosis that sustains the illusion of the self. It is dying to the constructed identity and returning to the center of being. This is real awakening, not belief, not emotion, but inner lucidity, where consciousness observes the mechanism of the ego and transcends it. And if this memory is not created but remembered, what in you still resists looking directly at your own true identity? And how long will the automatic continue deciding who you think you are? You did not begin when your name was registered. You did not arise when your biographical memory began to function. That was merely the point at which the false identity was installed. Hermeticism has always been brutally clear about this. The man who is born into the world is not the same as the one who knows himself. Before being born here, your soul did not think it was. That difference shatters the entire modern narrative about who you believe you are. Thoth, in the body of true Hermetic teaching, does not speak of emotional salvation. He speaks of knowledge of being, of a consciousness that recognizes itself as origin rather than product. Forgetting is not an accident, it is the condition of the fall into matter. You were thrown into automatism, trained to react, to identify, to confuse thought with identity. This is the mental prison. The secret memory is not in the brain, it is in the center of being. As long as you keep searching outside, you will remain blind within. Awakening is violent because it rips away the mask you call me. Why, you feel discomfort because something in you remembers wordlessly that all this is far too narrow. Mechanical life suffocates you because it was not made for one who has already touched essential consciousness. The Corpus Hermeticum describes the human as dual, one that belongs to the world and another that belongs to the eternal. You keep feeding the former and ignoring the latter, and you pay with emptiness, anxiety, a sense of displacement. Before being born here, there was no doubt, because there was no inner division. Doubt arises when the mind takes command and the observing consciousness is silenced. The veil of illusion does not prevent you from seeing the world, it prevents you from seeing yourself. This is not poetry, it is diagnosis. As long as you confuse yourself with the psychological ego, you will live as effect, never as cause. And something in you knows this now. Hermeticism does not ask for faith, it asks for inner lucidity. Thoth teaches that the ignorant is not the one who has not read, but the one who has not recognized his own nature. You were trained to look outward, to compete, accumulate, perform, while your inner essence was pushed into silence. That silence is not peace, it is repression. That is why the mind never rests. The ego lives on alert because it knows it is fragile. True identity does not defend itself because it cannot be threatened. Before being born here, there was no fear of disappearing because there was no attachment to form. Now you live trying to remain whole inside what is transient. This generates constant tension. Awakening is remembering that you are not what passes. When Thoth speaks of knowledge, he speaks of inner gnosis, not accumulated information. To know is to become what is known. That is why awakening frightens, because it demands the death of the ego. Not a beautiful symbolic death, but the real loss of control of the constructed identity. You resist because you were conditioned to believe that without this mask you do not exist. This is the structural lie of the matrix. The false identity must remain relevant to survive. It creates stories, dramas, urgencies. Essential consciousness observes all of this in silence. When you touch that point, the world does not disappear, but it loses the power to define you. This is the beginning of real freedom, and it begins as rupture, not comfort. You are not lost. You are misaligned with your true nature. Hermeticism calls this the forgetting of the nous. The mind believes it governs, but it only reacts. Before being born here, there was no reaction. There was presence. The natural state of being is not anxiety, it is clarity. Anxiety arises when the ego tries to sustain an artificial identity in an unstable world. You feel tired because you are constantly holding up something that is not you. This is not resolved through distraction or superficial spirituality. It is resolved through radical self-awareness. looking directly at the internal mechanism without trying to improve it. That alone already begins to break the hypnosis. The veil of Maya is not the world, it is the automatic interpretation of it. You do not suffer because of what happens, you suffer because of the character who believes he should be in control. Thoth teaches that the awakened person recognizes the invisible order behind form. This is not vague mysticism, it is direct perception of inner reality. As long as you identify with thoughts, emotions, and social roles, you will continue living on the periphery of being. The center remains intact, awaiting recognition. Awakening is a return, not a conquest. You do not become something new, you abandon what you never were. And this remembrance begins when you stop fleeing from silence. There is an intelligence within you that was not taught, not conditioned, not shaped. It has always been observing. In Hermeticism, this intelligence is the point of contact with the divine, not as belief, but as expanded consciousness. You were taught to ignore it because it dissolves external control. A person connected to their own essence is not easily manipulated. That is why social hypnosis depends on constant distraction. Noise, speed, excess stimulus, everything so that you do not hear what you already know. When the noise falls, memory begins to emerge, and it does not come with images, it comes with silent certainty. Something in you recognizes the truth without needing proof. Before being born here, there was no separation between knowing and being. Now you live fragmented, thinking one thing, feeling another, doing another. This fragmentation is the normal state of the ego. Hermeticism calls this ignorance of self, not intellectual ignorance, but existential. You live as if you were only body and story. This reduces the infinite to a temporary role. Inner alchemy begins when you stop trying to define yourself. Every definition is a prison. Deep identity does not fit into labels, it manifests as conscious presence. This cannot be explained, only recognized, and recognition hurts because it dismantles the character. You fear emptiness because you confuse emptiness with non-existence. In Hermeticism, emptiness is unmanifest plenitude. The ego fears emptiness because there is no narrative there. But it is precisely there that inner truth reveals itself. Before being born here, you did not need to assert yourself. Now you spend your entire life trying to prove something. This constant effort is the clearest sign of forgetting. One who knows who they are does not need to convince anyone. Real awakening does not make you special, it makes you quietly whole. And this wholeness threatens everything that lives off comparison, competition, and illusion, hence the intense resistance within you. Thoth does not promise future salvation, he points to present recognition. Time is a construction of the mind, essential consciousness is not bound to it. When you touch that point, haste loses its meaning, not because you renounce life, but because you leave automatism. Automatism is always chasing something that never arrives. The awakened being is whole now. This does not mean passivity, it means action without inner conflict. You act without losing yourself. This is impossible while the ego governs. That is why the process is internal, not external. No one can do it for you. The remembrance is intimate and non-transferable. You were conditioned to seek answers, while Hermeticism teaches the development of conscious attention. Answers feed the mind, attention dissolves illusion. When you observe thought without merging with it, something shifts. That shift is the beginning of the awakening of consciousness. It is not ecstasy, it is cold, precise clarity. The ego calls this a threat. The essence recognizes it as home. Before being born here, there was no inner dialogue. Dialogue arises when there is division. Returning to the center, silence is fragmentation. And this silence is not absence, it is total presence. The matrix is not only an external system, it lives within you as unconscious pattern. Mental habits, automatic beliefs, conditioned reactions. Breaking with this requires constant inner vigilance, not tense effort but lucid observation. Thoth speaks of governing oneself before attempting to govern the world. One who does not know himself is governed by everything, emotions, opinions, collective fears. The secret memory does not arise in crowds, it arises in direct confrontation with oneself. When you realize you are not the thought, something in you straightens. This inner posture changes everything. The world remains the same, but you do not. You want to awaken without losing anything, but Hermeticism is clear. Something must die. Not the body, not life, but the illusion of the self. As long as you try to save the ego, you will remain trapped. The ego cannot be refined, it can only be seen. Seen deeply, it loses power. This is not struggle, it is revelation. Revelation hurts because it dismantles decades of identification, but it also liberates because it restores simplicity. Before being born here, you carried no stories. Now you live buried beneath them. Letting go is not forgetting. It is disidentifying. This is real alchemy. You feel that this content affects you because it does not speak to your mind. It speaks to your inner gnosis. Something in you recognizes it effortlessly. That recognition is the thread pulling you back. Hermeticism has always been a path for few because it demands total responsibility. There is no external savior. The knowledge that saves is the one that reveals who you are. Thoth teaches that the person who knows himself becomes akin to the divine, not by moral merit but by identity. This is not metaphor, it is ontology. Being and knowing become one, and it begins now, at the exact point where you observe. The false identity lives by comparison, the essence lives by presence. As long as you measure yourself by external standards, you will remain distant. Returning to the center does not remove you from the world, it returns you to the world without slavery. You participate without losing yourself. This is real spiritual maturity, not escape, not denial. The ego creates extremes. Consciousness integrates. Before being born here, there was no such division. The process is remembering how to be whole within form. This requires courage, because no one can do it for you, and courage begins with not looking away. You realize now that much of what you called life was merely reaction. Reacting is not living. Living is being present. Presence does not judge, comment, or flee. It sees. This seeing dissolves spiritual blindness. You do not need to believe this. You need to verify it. Hermeticism has always demanded inner verification. If something cannot be directly seen, it is not knowledge. The secret memory confirms itself through inner evidence. You know when you touch it because it does not depend on opinion. That is the criterion, and it is available now. Each time you identify with a thought, you reinforce forgetting. Each time you observe, you weaken the illusion. The process is simple, but not easy. The mind hates losing centrality. It will negotiate, spiritualize, dramatize anything to avoid silence. Silence is the point where deep identity emerges, not as a voice, but as tranquil certainty. Before being born here, you did not need to explain yourself. Now you live justifying yourself. Returning to being dissolves this need and radically changes your relationship with everything. You are not here to accumulate hermetic concepts, but to realize what they point to. Thoth did not build a system to be admired, but a mirror to be crossed. Looking into this mirror requires brutal honesty. There is no pretending. Clear consciousness sees everything. That is why the ego fears this encounter, but only there does life cease to be mechanical. Automatic life is safe for the ego, but suffocating for the soul. Real awakening does not ask permission. It begins when you stop running. You feel that something is being activated because it is not new. The new does not recognize, it surprises. This recognizes because it was already there. Hermeticism calls this reminiscence of being, not psychological memory, but ontological. Something in you remembers what it has always been. This remembering has no images, it has alignment. You feel more vertical inside, less fragmented. This is a sign of returning to the center, and this return does not happen all at once. It deepens as observation is sustained. Each conscious instant breaks one link of the invisible prison. None of this depends on time, place, or external ritual. It depends on your willingness not to hide. The awakening of consciousness begins when you stop negotiating with illusion. As long as you want to keep the character comfortable, you will remain divided. Division is suffering, wholeness is simplicity. Before being born here, there was no such effort. Now you feel the weight because you live far from the axis. The axis is not something to build, it is something to recognize, and that recognition has no return. Once seen, something in you no longer accepts complete sleep. You may feel resistance now, irritation, discomfort. This is not a sign of error, it is a sign of impact. The ego reacts when it loses territory. Do not fight it. Observe. Observation is the alchemical acid that dissolves false identity. Thoth always pointed to inner governance as the key. One who does not govern himself is governed. This is not a threat, it is a statement. Freedom begins the moment you see this without dramatizing it, and when you see it, something in you begins to remember more strongly. And if this memory were not something distant, but something reactivating now, exactly as you read, what in you is still trying to cling to illusion as if it were safety? And what would happen if you remained attentive to this inner point without diverting, without explaining, without fleeing, simply observing what begins to emerge? You feel it now because something in you is being pressed against the truth, and the truth does not caress the ego, it exposes it. Before being born here, you did not need validation, you did not need an audience, you did not need to prove anything because the soul was aligned with its own essence. Hermeticism is direct in stating that the fall into matter installs division. What you now call me is a mechanism, not an origin. It is a false identity built to operate in the sensible world. The secret memory is not lost, it is buried beneath layers of invisible conditioning. Each automatic reaction reinforces forgetting. Each instant of conscious attention begins to break the hypnosis. This is not comfortable because it dismantles the character, and if it hurts, it is because it touches the right point. You were educated to function, not to perceive. The world demands performance, not presence. That is why mechanical life feels normal and silence feels like a threat. Before being born here, there was no such inner pressure because there was no fragmentation. Hermeticism describes the one who is forgotten as someone who lives outside the center of being. You live on the periphery of your own consciousness. Thoughts decide, emotions drag you along, impulses command. This is mental prison. The secret memory begins when you observe this theater without mixing with it. Observing is not analyzing, it is seeing, and seeing dissolves illusion with surgical precision. The matrix does not need to convince you of anything. It only needs to keep you busy, too busy to look within, too busy to notice that the identity you defend changes all the time. Before being born here, there was no such instability. Deep identity does not oscillate with praise or criticism. The psychological ego does. That is why it lives on alert. This constant state of alert is the fatigue you feel. It is not physical, it is existential. The secret memory emerges when you realize that this fatigue is not normal. It is a sign of misalignment with true nature. Hermeticism does not romanticize awakening. It shows that remembering who you were requires the death of the ego. Not a beautiful idea, but the real loss of the character's centrality. You resist because you were trained to believe that without the ego, there is no direction. This is a structural lie. The ego reacts. It does not guide. What guides is the observing consciousness. Before being born here, there was no inner conflict because there was no dispute for control. Now there is noise because you live divided. Remembering is integrating. Integration adds nothing. It removes excess. You fear losing identity because you have never consciously experienced being without it. The fear is not of emptiness, it is of the unknown. But Hermeticism is clear, what is unknown to the ego is the home of the essence. The illusion of the self is sustained by narratives. Inner truth is sustained by silent evidence. When you touch that evidence, there is no argument against it. That is why this is not about believing. It is about seeing. And seeing does not depend on language, it depends on presence. Before being born here, you did not need to compare yourself. Comparison arises from separation. The world teaches you to measure everything, including yourself. This keeps the ego active and the essence asleep. Social hypnosis works because it constantly reinforces false identity, status, image, opinion. Hermeticism has always been a path of rupture with this, not to flee the world, but not to be governed by it. One who remembers who they are acts in the world without being lost in it. This is real inner sovereignty. You perceive now that much of what you call thought is repetition, borrowed patterns, absorbed beliefs, conditioned fears. This is not you, it is internal programming. The secret memory does not argue with thought, it observes it. Continuous observation weakens automatism. This requires inner discipline, not external ritual, but lucid vigilance. Before being born here, this vigilance was natural. Now it must be consciously reclaimed. This return is the path. The veil of illusion does not fall all at once. It becomes transparent. You begin to see through it. You still use form, but you no longer confuse yourself with it. This changes everything. Emotions arise, but they do not define you. Thoughts pass, but they do not govern. This state is not ecstasy, it is lucidity. The ego calls it coldness, the essence calls it clarity. Before being born here, this clarity was the natural state. What you now call normal is deviation. You feel that something is being reactivated because essential consciousness recognizes when it is called. Hermeticism has always spoken of direct knowledge, not mediated by belief. This knowledge does not come from outside, it emerges when noise subsides. That is why silence is so threatening to the ego. In silence, there is no character. In silence, memory begins to speak without words, and what it reveals cannot easily be forgotten again. False identity lives in future and past. Essence lives in presence. Before being born here, there was no anxiety because there was no projection. Now you live projecting, anticipating, reliving. This keeps the mind busy and distant from now. The now is the portal. Hermeticism points to this with rigor. The real is what is. Everything else is interpretation. When you remain with what is, spiritual blindness begins to dissolve, and this does not depend on belief, it depends on attention. You do not need to become spiritual, you need to stop distracting yourself from yourself. True spirituality in Hermeticism is radical self-knowledge. To know yourself is to know the structure of illusion. When you understand how the ego operates, it loses power, not through repression, but through exposure. Before being born here, there was no need for repression because there was no identification. Now you confuse observing with controlling. Observing is allowing everything to appear without merging with it. This requires courage. The ego wants answers. The essence wants vision. Answers close. Vision opens. That is why this content does not give you comfort. It gives you friction. Friction generates consciousness. Consciousness generates freedom. Hermeticism never promised comfort. It promised truth, and truth cuts. It cuts illusions, dependencies, false identities. What remains is not emptiness. It is full presence, and that presence recognizes itself as origin. You were trained to seek meaning outside it, career, relationship, external purpose. All of this may exist, but it cannot be the source of identity. When it is, it generates attachment and fear. Before being born here, there was no such inversion. Identity did not depend on circumstance. Now you live hostage to it. Real awakening restores the axis. The axis does not eliminate form, it organizes it. An aligned life is a simple life even when complex. This is inner maturity. Hermeticism teaches that the one who knows himself governs himself. Governing oneself is not controlling emotions, it is not being dragged by them. This is only possible when you remember who observes. The observing consciousness does not react, it sees, and by seeing it dissolves. This dissolution is not destruction, it is refinement, real inner alchemy. Before being born here, this alchemy was not necessary because there was no psychological lead. Now there is, and it must be transmuted. You feel resistance because something in you does not want to release control. Control is the ego's crutch. Without it, the ego fears disappearing. But what disappears is false identity, not being. Being cannot disappear because it was never constructed. This is not belief, it is experiential verification. When you touch this point, fear loses its argument. It does not vanish at once, but it loses authority, and this changes your relationship with everything. Social hypnosis works because it reinforces the idea that you are what you do, what you have, what you think. Hermeticism dismantles this by showing that you are what perceives. Perception precedes action. Before being born here, this precedence was obvious. Now it has been inverted. You act to feel that you exist. This is exhausting. Remembering restores simplicity. Existing does not require effort, only presence. You realize now that this is not about improving the ego, but about seeing its limited nature. Improving it only makes it more efficient at maintaining illusion. Seeing its structure dissolves it. This does not happen by willpower. It happens through continuous, choiceless attention. This is real Hermetic practice, not empty ritualism, but living practice, and this practice begins now in the instant you do not turn away. Before being born here, you did not need a fixed identity. Fixity is fear. Being is fluid without losing essence. The ego needs labels to feel safe. Hermeticism shows that true safety does not come from rigidity, but from alignment. When you are aligned with inner reality, the external loses the power to disorganize you. This does not isolate you. It stabilizes you. Inner stability is freedom. You feel that something is being demanded of you now because awakening is not passive. It requires responsibility. There is no unseeing. Once memory begins to emerge, you must choose between deepening or distracting yourself again. Hermeticism has always framed this as a conscious choice. There is no external punishment, there is internal consequence. Remembering expands, forgetting contracts, and you feel the difference in the body and the mind in silence. And if this sensation of recognition were not fleeting, but the beginning of a return to the center, what in you still tries to cling to illusion as identity? And what would happen if you remained attentive, now and afterward, without seeking answers, simply observing who in you perceives this question arising? You feel the pressure increase because remembrance does not ask for permission. Before being born here, you did not negotiate with truth, you were it, and everything in you knows this now. Hermeticism never spoke of comfort, it spoke of recognition, and recognition hurts because it strips away the varnish of false identity. You were trained to confuse function with essence, role with being, and this created the invisible prison you call life. The secret memory is not spiritual nostalgia, it is raw lucidity. When it touches you, the ego trembles because it loses centrality. This is not an attack, it is revelation. And revelation does not apologize, it cuts straight to the point where you lost yourself. You did not fall into matter by mistake, you fell by forgetting. Hermeticism is precise. Forgetting does not erase the soul, it only veils it. That is why you feel displaced even when everything goes right. Success does not cure spiritual blindness. Before being born here, there was no need for validation because deep identity did not depend on applause. Now you live seeking external mirrors to confirm that you exist. This exhausts you because it does not work. The secret memory emerges when you realize that no external confirmation sustains the inner void. The void is not lack, it is unrecognized space, and that space is you. The matrix thrives as long as you identify. Identification is the glue of forgetting. Every "this is me" attached to a thought, emotion, or story reinforces the illusion. Hermeticism teaches detachment, not combat. Observation dissolves without conflict. Before being born here, observing was natural. Now you must relearn it because you were conditioned to react. Reaction keeps the machinery turning, observation dismantles it. This requires continuous presence, not heroism, but radical honesty. And honesty begins when you admit you do not know who you are beyond the character. What you call personality is internal programming, mental habits, inherited beliefs, collective fears. This does not define you, it defines only how you were trained to function. Hermeticism rigorously separates function from essence. Confusing the two is to live amputated. Before being born here, there was no amputation, there was wholeness. The secret memory restores this wholeness as lucid silence. The ego calls it emptiness because it finds nothing to lean on. The essence calls it home. The veil of Maya is not distant metaphysics, it is the automatic habit of interpreting everything from the psychological self. This habit creates conflict where none exists. Hermeticism does not ask you to change the world, it asks you to change the point of observation. When the point changes, the world loses the power to capture you. Before being born here, you were not capturable. Now you are pulled by any stimulus. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. Conditioning dissolves with attention. Attention without choice. Attention that even sees the urge to flee. You feel resistance because the ego tries to negotiate. It wants to awaken without dying. That is impossible. Death of the ego is not annihilation of body or life. It is the fall of false centrality. While the ego rules, the essence observes from afar. When the essence assumes, the ego becomes a tool. This is the correct order. Hermeticism is clear about inner governance. Whoever does not govern himself is governed by impulses, fears, opinions. Before being born here, there was no governance because there was no usurpation. Now the axis must be reclaimed. The anxiety you feel is the sound of inner division. Division is born of identification. Identification creates fear of loss. Loss of what? A mask. The secret memory reveals that nothing essential can be lost. This revelation is not consolation, it is fact. When seen, it changes your inner posture. You continue living, but without begging for meaning. Meaning emanates from the center of being. Before being born here, meaning was not sought, it was lived. Now you chase it because you forgot where it resides. Hermeticism does not promise instant illumination. It promises progressive clarity. Each moment of observation weakens the illusion. Each time you see a thought as an object rather than an owner, something aligns. This is not a technique, it is an attitude, the attitude of not fleeing. The ego flees to survive, the essence remains. Remaining is difficult because you were trained to escape. Escape silence, discomfort, truth. But it is in discomfort that memory begins to speak without words. You confuse emotion with truth. Emotion is movement, truth is presence. Hermeticism does not deny emotion, but it does not crown it. Crowning emotion creates inner tyranny. Before being born here, emotion arose and passed without identity. Now you turn it into story. Stories build prisons. The secret memory dismantles narrative by revealing the observer. When the observer is recognized, the story loses power. It does not disappear, but it no longer rules. This is practical freedom, not rhetoric. Social hypnosis needs you to compare yourself. Comparison sustains false identity. Hermeticism cuts comparison at the root by pointing to direct knowledge. Direct does not depend on another. It depends on seeing. Seeing is not thinking. Thinking comments afterward. As long as you confuse commentary with vision, you remain distant. Before being born here, there was no commentary. There was perception. Returning to perception disarms noise. Noise falls when you stop feeding it, and you feed it with scattered attention. You were taught to accumulate. Hermeticism teaches purification. To purify is to remove what is not essential. Each belief seen as belief loses weight. Each fear seen as fear loses command. This does not happen through denial, it happens through light. Light is attention, continuous attention. Before being born here, light did not need to be sought. Now you cover it with stimulation. Turning off stimulation is an act of courage. Inner, silent, daily courage. False identity lives in time. Essence lives in the now. The now is not a psychological instant, it is a field of presence. When you enter this field, haste loses meaning. Not because life ends, but because the mind slows. Slowing down exposes the emptiness the ego fears. That emptiness is unrecognized plenitude. Hermeticism points to this without cheap poetry. It points to it as experiential fact. You can verify it now if you do not flee. Stay with the sensation without labeling it. See what remains. You do not need to believe anything you hear here. You need to see. Hermeticism has always demanded verification. If something cannot be directly seen, it is not knowledge. The secret memory confirms itself when the observer recognizes himself. This recognition does not shout, it settles. Settling is not settling for less. It is aligning. Alignment changes how you act. You act without carrying identity. Action without identity is light and precise. Before being born here, this lightness was natural. The ego wants control. The essence operates through clarity. Control creates tension. Clarity creates direction. When you see, you know what to do without conflict. Hermeticism calls this governance of the nous. It is not mystical, it is functional. Those who see act better, those who do not see react. Reaction multiplies error. Action with clarity reduces friction. Life organizes itself around presence. This is not a promise, it is an effect you can observe when noise falls. You feel anger at times because something in you knows it was deceived, not only by something external but by a narrative, the narrative that you are what you think. Breaking this narrative hurts, but pain is passage. Resistance prolongs. Crossing liberates. Hermeticism does not ask you to like the process, it asks you to be honest with what arises. No spiritualized escape, no gilding discomfort. Stay with the fact. The fact is, you are not the thought. Inner alchemy does not transform lead into gold outside. It transforms identification into presence within. Each identification seen is dissolved lead. Each presence recognized is functional gold. Functional because it changes concrete life. Less drama, more precision. Less fear, more attention. Before being born here, this alchemy was not necessary. Now it is inevitable if you want to live whole. Whole does not mean perfect. Whole means aligned. Alignment cuts half of suffering. You try to understand in order to postpone seeing. Understanding is useful later. Now it interferes. Hermeticism distinguishes knowing from thinking. Knowing is being, thinking is mapping. The map is not the territory. You live in the map. The secret memory pulls you into the territory. The territory is silent. Silence is not absence. It is field. The field where observing consciousness recognizes itself. When this happens, something closes and something opens. Compulsive seeking closes. Real investigation opens. False identity wants guarantees. Essence does not need them. Guarantees belong to time. Presence stands outside temporal anxiety. When you touch this, the need for certainty diminishes. You do not become apathetic, you become stable. Inner stability is a threat to systems that live off distraction. That is why distraction is constant. Breaking with it is an internal political act. Political in the sense of self-governance. Thoth always pointed to this governance as the key. There is no other. You realize that this content does not try to convince you. It places you before yourself. This is uncomfortable because you spent your life looking outward. Looking inward is not sentimental introspection. It is precise observation. Observation without choice. What appears, appears. Choice comes later. When you choose too early, you preserve illusion. Allowing appearance is courage, the courage not to intervene. This courage opens the portal of memory. The portal does not lead to a mythical past, it leads to the essential now. Before being born here, this now was everything. Now it is covered by stories. Removing the stories does not impoverish you, it simplifies you. Simplicity is power. Power without ego. Ego consumes power. Presence releases it. This changes your gaze, your speech, your decisions, quietly. And that is how you know it is real. You do not need to announce awakening, you need to sustain attention. Sustain it when no one sees. Sustain it when it hurts. Sustain it when the mind screams. Each sustaining deepens. Deepening is not accumulating, it is removing what is not you. This requires fierce patience, patience that does not negotiate with escape. Before being born here, patience was not necessary. Now it is the bridge. And if that bridge is being crossed now as you read, what in you tries to pull you back to false identity? And what would happen if you remained attentive to the observer, without naming it, without explaining it, simply allowing the memory of being to recognize itself again? You realize that what is being touched now is not emotion, it is structure. Before being born here, you were not organized by fear, desire, or the need for approval, because essence depends on none of that to exist. Hermeticism has always pointed out that the error is not living in the world, but confusing yourself with what is transient. You were trained to cling to form as if it were identity, and this created the false identity that governs your choices. The secret memory begins when you sense that this governance is illegitimate. Illegitimate because it does not arise from the soul, but from conditioning. What governs you today does not know you, and what knows you observes in silence, waiting for space. You call me a set of reflexes. Reflexes do not decide, they react. Hermeticism does not romanticize this, it exposes it. It exposes automatic life as a symptom of spiritual blindness. Before being born here, you did not react to the world. You participated in it with presence. Now you live being pulled by stimuli. Stimulus is not direction. Direction arises from clear consciousness. When consciousness assumes command, noise loses power. The noise does not disappear, but it stops ruling, and this is the beginning of real awakening. You feel discomfort because something in you refuses to keep living on autopilot. This discomfort is not weakness. It is a sign of active memory. The memory of being does not shout, it presses for alignment. Before being born here, there was no misalignment. Now you live divided between what you do and what you feel. This division charges interest, fatigue, anxiety, the sense of always being late. Hermeticism calls this distancing from the center of being. Returning to the center is not changing your life, it is changing the axis. The veil of illusion does not sustain itself. It needs your constant distraction. Distraction with thoughts, images, expectations. Each time you get lost in these, you reinforce forgetting. Each time you observe without merging, you weaken the veil. This is not theory, it is direct practice. Before being born here, observing was natural, now it requires decision. The decision not to flee. Fleeing is the ego's habit. Remaining is the essence's gesture. You were taught to explain everything. Explanation is defense. Hermeticism asks for direct verification. Verification does not explain, it establishes. When you establish that you are not the thought, something loosens. This loosening is not mystical, it is functional. Thought continues, but it does not command. Command returns to the observing consciousness. Before being born here, this hierarchy was obvious. Now it has been inverted. Re-inverting it is the work. The internal matrix feeds on identification with roles, stories, labels. The ego needs labels to exist, the essence does not. When you stop labeling yourself, the ego panics. That panic is the resistance you feel. Do not fight it. Observe it. Observation is alchemical acid. It dissolves without confrontation. Confrontation strengthens, observation weakens. This is applied inner alchemy. You sense that this call does not offer rest. It offers responsibility, the responsibility not to deceive yourself. Hermeticism has always been a path for the few because few accept this responsibility. It is easier to outsource meaning. Before being born here, there was no outsourcing. Now you delegate your identity to external opinions and that empties you. The secret memory restores sovereignty. Sovereignty is not power over others, it is self-governance. The ego wants linear progress. The essence operates through presence. Presence does not accumulate, it deepens. To deepen is to remove layers. Each layer removed reveals another. That is why the process does not end. There is no conclusion. There is growing clarity. Before being born here, this clarity was the baseline state. Now it is consciously reclaimed. Reclaiming requires vigilance. Vigilance without tension. Tension is the ego trying to control. Vigilance is consciousness watching. You confuse silence with emptiness. The emptiness you fear is the absence of the character. The presence that arises is the inner self without a mask. This presence has no opinion. It has vision. Vision changes how you move through the day. Less reaction, more precision, less drama, more appropriate action. This does not make you cold. It makes you whole. Wholeness needs to prove nothing. It expresses itself. Anxiety diminishes as identity loosens. It does not vanish by miracle. It loses fuel. The fuel is identification with scenarios. Scenarios live in time. Presence lives in the now. The now is not a brief instant. It is a stable field. When you enter this field, the body relaxes. The body recognizes legitimate governance. Before being born here, this recognition was constant. Now it happens in flashes. Each flash is an invitation to remain. Hermeticism does not promise escape from the world, it promises inner realignment. To realign is to place the observer at the center. Everything else revolves around it. When this happens, decisions become simpler. Not because life's simplified, but because the axis is firm. A firm axis reduces noise. Low noise allows listening to inner truth. This listening is not loud, it directs. You realize that much of what you call a problem is friction between essence and mask. The mask wants recognition, the essence wants expression. As long as you feed the mask, friction continues. When you observe it without obeying, friction turns into available energy. Energy once spent on conflict returns as attention. Attention is real power. Power without ego. This is practical spiritual maturity. Social hypnosis taught you to confuse value with performance. Hermeticism dismantles this by showing that value is inherent to being. Performance is function. Function changes. Being remains. When you live from being, performance improves effortlessly. When you live from performance, being is lost. The secret memory pulls you back to the point where value does not oscillate. This point does not depend on applause. You fear not knowing who you will be without the story. This fear is the ego's last guardian. Crossing it requires trust in essential consciousness. Not blind trust, but verified trust. You verify it by remaining attentive and noticing that nothing collapses. Life continues. You continue. Only the drama falls, and drama was dead weight. Before being born here, there was no drama. There was movement. The veil of Maya dissolves when you stop fighting to be someone. Being someone is a prison. Being is freedom. Hermeticism has always separated persona from essence. Persona is a tool. Essence is origin. When the tool governs, everything becomes effort. When the origin governs, the tool serves. This reorganizes your relationship with work, relationships, and choices. not by rules but by clarity. You do not need to adopt Hermetic belief. You need to apply the fundamental Hermetic gesture. Know yourself. To know is not to describe, it is to recognize. Recognize the observer as you. When this happens, the question, who was I before being born, stops being a concept and becomes a sensation of alignment. You do not see images, you feel stability. This stability is not boredom, it is ground. The death of the ego does not happen all at once, it happens through successive losses of centrality. Each time you observe and do not react, a piece falls away. Do not force it. Forcing creates a new spiritual ego. Observe. Correct observation is impersonal, it seeks no result. The result arises as effect. Before being born here, there was no seeking. There was being. The return is the same. You notice the mind trying to conclude. Conclusion is control. This path does not conclude, it deepens. Each deepening opens another level of clarity. This keeps attention alive. Living attention prevents a full return to automatism. Automatism always tries to come back. Do not fight it, see it. Seeing is enough. Enough because it dissolves. It dissolves because it illuminates. Essence does not compete, ego does. When essence takes the lead, comparison loses meaning. You stop measuring your life by someone else's ruler. This does not isolate you, it frees you. Relationships become truer. Less projection, more presence. Hermeticism calls this living according to nature, the nature of being, not of habit. Before being born here, this alignment was natural. You sense that this process requires constancy. It does, because distraction is persistent, and it is persistent because it was trained. Training is undone by practice. Not ritual practice, but the practice of attention. Attention to thought, emotion, impulse, without condemning or justifying. See. See again. See always. This simplicity is radical. Radical because it goes to the root. Returning to the center of being is not an event, it is a posture. An inner posture of not selling yourself to the first narrative, of checking from presence. This posture changes everything slowly and irreversibly. Once the difference between being and mask is seen, you cannot fully pretend again. Something in you remains awake. That something is living memory. And if this state of attention is maintained after the video, in daily life, in small choices, what in you will try to pull you back into illusion? And what happens if you recognize that movement without following it, allowing deep identity to reclaim the center while life continues to unfold? If something in you was touched, do not try to explain it. In Hermeticism, what is true does not need to be believed. It needs to be recognized. This sensation does not come from the mind, it comes from the memory of being. The ego will try to erase this with distraction, logic, or noise. Do not allow it, remain attentive, observe who observes. This is how remembrance stays active. If this content spoke directly to you, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next portals of gnosis. Leave a simple comment. I remembered. This anchors attention and keeps the process alive. This is not an entertainment channel. It is a channel of remembrance.